The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the forest floor into a treacherous swamp of mud and broken leaves. Every footstep was a struggle, every movement accompanied by the distant rumble of artillery. Radios crackled and hissed, their messages lost in static, while the sharp scent of wet earth and gunpowder filled the air. The small, all-female patrol moved cautiously, boots sinking into the muck, hearts pounding with tension. Suddenly, a glint of metal caught the dim light through the fog dog tags, forming a perfect circle on the ground. No one had fired a shot, yet something impossible had occurred. The squad froze, ears straining for any hint of movement. And then, as if the forest itself held its breath, something unseen shifted in the shadows. A presence that would change everything in an instant. Asterisk, it was the Eastern European Front. 1944, and the war had reached a critical turning point. The female reconnaissance patrol, trained for stealth and precision, carried intelligence that could tip the balance of an upcoming offensive. Each woman knew that failure was not an option. The lives of countless soldiers and civilians depended on their mission. The trees loomed around them like silent sentinels, their branches tangled and heavy with rain, concealing threats both seen and unseen. Maps and diagrams pinned to the command room walls showed the patrol's route and enemy positions. Yet no amount of planning could account for what lurked in the mist. Every step carried weight, every decision bore consequence. And while the squad pressed forward, unaware, a more insidious danger waited, one that no orders, no maps, and no training could prepare them for. But no one realized the real threat hadn't even appeared yet. Asterisk, the patrol had barely taken a few cautious steps deeper into the mist when the first anomaly appeared. A faint signal crackled through the dead radio, a voice distorted and unrecognizable. The message was brief, cryptic, yet it froze them in place, a series of coordinates followed by a name, the squad leaders. None of them had expected communication from anyone other than their command, and certainly not in this isolated sector. The forest, which had seemed merely oppressive moments before, now felt alive, watching, almost sentient. Then came a flare, slicing through the fog above the canopy, momentarily illuminating twisted tree trunks and the slick mud beneath their boots. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending toward the light, and in that sudden brightness, one of the women glimpsed movement too fast, too purposeful to be an enemy scout. Confusion rippled through the squad. Their mission had been simple reconnaissance, avoiding detection while gathering intelligence on enemy positions. This coded message, aimed specifically at their leader, disrupted everything. Questions collided in their minds. Who was monitoring them? Why mention her name? And most pressingly, were they being lured into a trap? The sense of urgency escalated with each heartbeat. Radios crackled again, this time with an ominous silence following the static, as if even the machines were holding their breath. The forest itself seemed to respond, the mist curling in unnatural swirls, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a whisper of movement. Just beyond vision, every instinct screamed that something was about to happen. The squad's formation tightened, weapons raised, eyes scanning every shadow. And then, without warning, a single rifle shot rang out from the distance, echoing between the trees like a harbinger. It was a shot fired, yet no figure emerged, no muzzle flash lingered, and the patrol realized with chilling clarity, whatever was coming. It wasn't conventional, and it was already among them. This wasn't just a disruption of their mission. It was the beginning of an event that would defy reason, one that would determine whether any of them would survive the next 90 seconds. Asterisk, the forest seemed to breathe around them. Thick mist curling between twisted trunks, swallowing shapes and sounds alike. Every snap of a branch underfoot or rustle of leaves sent shivers through the patrol, their senses stretched taut as piano wires. The initial shock of the mysterious signal had barely worn off when confusion set in. Radios, which had once crackled with static, now emitted only distorted noise, occasionally cutting out midword. Orders from command were delayed, fragmented, and contradictory. The squad leader, a veteran of numerous reconnaissance missions, barked terse commands. but the mist made it impossible to maintain visual contact with all her team. Each woman relied on instincts honed under fire. Yet instinct alone could not pierce the fog that seemed to thicken with every step, as if the forest itself was conspiring against them. Suddenly, the first tangible chaos arrived. A pair of enemy scouts emerged from the fog, only fleeting silhouettes against the gray-green haze. The squad reacted instantly, weapons drawn, adrenaline surging, but when they fired, the shots echoed hollowly, bouncing off unseen obstacles. The forest swallowed the sound almost as quickly as it was made. Amid the tension, one soldier tripped over a hidden root, sharp cry piercing the fog, and immediately the patrol's attention splintered. Fear spread like wildfire, infecting each woman with a creeping dread that this was no ordinary reconnaissance mishap. Something far darker was at play. Jammed radios and scrambled coordinates compounded the confusion. The patrol had no reliable way to communicate with command, or even among themselves beyond shouted commands, which were often lost in the dense undergrowth. Mist rolled over their shoulders like living fingers, and the sound of distant artillery seemed impossibly close. Each boom a reminder that the front lines were moving, that time was slipping away. One member, trying to take bearings from a tattered map, realized their route had become unreliable. Paths they had memorized were obscured, landmarks invisible, and the forest felt endless, as though it had folded in on itself. Every step forward was a gamble. Every glance behind a potential death sentence. Human reactions, raw and unfiltered, became painfully visible. Panic whispered at the edges of their discipline, and the squad leader's controlled shouts sometimes bordered on hysteria. The mist made faces ghostly, expressions twisted into shadows of doubt and fear. Misplaced trust became a liability. Whispers of suspicion flitted through the team like moths around a candle. One soldier's hand shook uncontrollably as she tried to reload a jammed weapon, while another stared wide-eyed at something that wasn't there, or perhaps something that was better left unseen. The tension was palpable, a living organism feeding on their fear. And the squad knew that one misstep, one moment of hesitation, could spell disaster. The forest's grip on the patrol tightened with each passing moment. Rain fell harder, hammering the leaves and soaking through the women's uniforms, weighing them down with cold and fatigue. Visibility was near zero, the fog curling around limbs like fingers trying to hold them back. A sudden crack, the sound of snapping timber, froze them mid-step. Something moved just beyond the edge of perception, a shadow that didn't align with any known threat. The squad reacted instinctively, weapons raised, breaths shallow, hearts hammering. But every shot fired seemed swallowed by the mist, echoing only to return as distorted, mocking whispers. Their footsteps left fleeting impressions in the mud, disappearing almost instantly, as if the ground itself was erasing their presence. The confusion mounted as more enemy scouts appeared, merging like ghosts from the fog. The patrol's formation splintered under the pressure, one soldier sliding down a muddy slope, while another stumbled into the thick undergrowth. Calls for regrouping were lost in the hiss of rain and the sharp cracks of distant artillery. Every attempt at coordination seemed to unravel as quickly as it was spoken. Fear transformed into hyper-awareness. Every snap, rustle, and whisper was scrutinized for meaning, yet nothing felt reliable. Radios, intermittently buzzing with static, added only frustration. The patrol's sense of time fractured. Minutes stretched into eternity as the forest seemed to close in on them from all sides. Each tree, a potential ambush. Each shadow, a threat waiting to strike. Human emotions surged in waves, unpredictable and raw. Anger, fear, and frustration intertwined with adrenaline. One soldier screamed at another to move faster, only to collapse to her knees in exhaustion moments later. The squad leader barked orders that were half heard, half understood, while glances of doubt and suspicion flickered across the team. Trust, their most vital weapon, wavered. Each woman's mind raced. Was this an orchestrated trap, or had the forest itself conspired to confuse them? Amid the chaos, one of the soldiers swore she saw a figure moving just beyond the trees, faster than any human should, yet every time she raised her weapon, Nothing remained but fog and shadows. The forest had become a living labyrinth, feeding not just on their bodies, but on their minds, amplifying every fear into a tangible, suffocating presence. The patrol struggled forward, every movement a gamble, every decision a potential death sentence. Miscommunication, fatigue, and fear blurred the line between reality and imagination. When a sudden flare illuminated the trees, revealing fleeting glimpses of enemy positions, and the relentless fog became apparent. The chaos was no longer tactical, it was existential. The forest, the enemy, the mission itself seemed to merge into a single, oppressive force. And in the hearts of the women, a singular thought solidified. Survival would demand courage, cunning, and perhaps a willingness to confront something that defied all understanding. The patrol, battered and exhausted, pressed forward into the heart of the mist-shrouded forest. Each step carried the weight of imminent danger, and each breath was punctuated by the distant boom of artillery that seemed unnervingly close. Shadows shifted faster than the eye could follow, every rustle of leaves suggesting both enemy presence and the forest's own eerie sentience. The squad moved with desperate precision, balancing fear with training, yet it became painfully clear that conventional tactics were failing them. Ambushes came from every angle, bullets whistling through the rain, while unseen forces seemed to manipulate their movements. One soldier dragged a wounded comrade over slippery roots, only to be forced to pivot as another shadow moved in the periphery. Timing, coordination, and sheer instinct became the difference between life and death. Chaos escalated further as betrayal and confusion crept in. Misunderstandings over orders caused near collisions. One soldier nearly fired on a teammate in the dense fog, and the squad leader's attempts to regain control were drowned out by panic and environmental noise. Their mission, reconnaissance, and intelligence gathering became secondary to sheer survival. Emotional stakes heightened with every second, promises whispered before deployment. Pledges to protect one another and silent vows to survive now collided with the relentless unknown. Every flash of light, every distant sound, became a test of courage. The forest itself seemed to respond, bending shadows, thickening mist, and warping sound to unsettle them further. Amid this crescendo of tension, moments of heroism shone starkly against the backdrop of fear. The squad leader acted decisively, pulling one woman from the mud as gunfire snapped around them, while another covered their rear, suppressing enemy movements with pinpoint accuracy despite exhaustion. Time stretched agonizingly. Every decision was immediate, every misstep potentially fatal. The emotional resonance of the mission, survival, camaraderie, duty collided with the inescapable horror of the unknown. Blinking lights of distant artillery, intermittent flares, and the surreal glint of the dog tags in mud punctuated each harrowing instant. Then, in a moment suspended between disbelief and reality, the forest seemed to shift. Shadows froze, enemy movements inexplicably paused, and an almost tangible silence replaced the chaos for a fleeting heartbeat. The patrol had survived the onslaught, yet the rules governing reality appeared suspended. The dog tags glimmered once more, a haunting reminder of the initial mystery. Their perfect circle, a symbol of courage, loss, and forces beyond understanding. For historians, soldiers, and those who would later hear the story, this moment became inexplicable, a convergence of human bravery, relentless danger, and an enduring enigma that no explanation could fully capture. The forest that had witnessed the mysterious disappearance of the female patrol remained. Eerily still, long after the echoes of gunfire and shouted orders had faded, rain-slick leaves clung to branches, dripping steadily into puddles below, and the air hung thick with fog, the kind that seemed to swallow sound and blur every shape. Command dispatched search parties immediately. Yet even the most experienced trackers found themselves disoriented, struggling to follow tracks that dissolved in mud and mist as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. Hours turned into days, and the only tangible sign of the patrol's presence, the 6 dog tags, was discovered in a small clearing, arranged with impossible precision in a perfect circle. No weapons lay nearby, No bodies, no evidence of struggle beyond the natural debris of the forest floor. Soldiers stood frozen, staring at the gleaming metal in disbelief, unable to reconcile the meticulous order of the tags with the chaos that had preceded their disappearance. Eyewitnesses began to trickle in from surrounding units, their accounts fragmentary but hauntingly consistent. A reconnaissance team reported fleeting shadows that moved with unnatural speed, disappearing as soon as they were observed. Local villagers, huddled in the nearby hamlets, spoke of faint whispers carried by the wind at night, almost human, yet impossibly distant, seeming to echo through the trees in patterns that defied explanation. Diaries recovered from surviving soldiers who had encountered the patrol in prior days reflected growing anxiety the forest itself. They wrote seemed alive, aware, a presence that watched without revealing itself. One entry read, "Even when the patrol vanished, I could feel eyes on me moving just out of reach, as though the forest remembered and waited." Another noted the impossibility of the dog tags arrangement, describing them as a silent signature left by something beyond comprehension, a final mark of those who had disappeared without a trace. Command officers were confounded. Reports from the field described a mission that had been meticulously planned, yet in execution had spiraled into a scenario that violated every principle of military engagement. The terrain offered no advantage to the enemy that could explain such precision, no natural mechanism that could account for the disappearance of trained soldiers. Analysts pored over maps. Satellite images were available, and intelligence reports, but each theory collapsed under the weight of the dog tag's eerie perfection. Some suggested enemy capture, others speculated a tragic accident, yet every scenario failed to account for the absence of bodies, weapons, or any sign of a struggle. The military community, typically methodical and pragmatic, was left with a gnawing sense of unease, a reminder that war sometimes produced events that reason could not contain. Asterisk, the dog tags themselves became an object of both fascination and dread. Photographs were taken, measurements recorded, and investigators returned again and again to the clearing. But no configuration could explain how they had come to rest in such a flawless circle. Some speculated that the patrol had arranged them deliberately, a final act of solidarity or ritual. Though the lack of any human remains rendered this theory impossible, others whispered of forces unaccounted for, supernatural or inexplicable, a forest that claimed its victims in ways science could not measure. The circle of metal, gleaming faintly under the overcast sky, became a symbol of the mission's unresolved nature, a chilling testament to courage that ended not in recognition or victory, but in absolute mystery. Even the soldiers who returned from nearby missions spoke of strange phenomena. Reports described fleeting glances of movement beyond the periphery, sounds that could not be attributed to known wildlife, and moments when compasses and radios malfunctioned simultaneously in the forest. One survivor wrote in his journal, "I thought I had seen the patrol moving ahead of me. But when I reached that point, nothing remained. Not a footprint, not a branch broken. Only the mud, as if the ground had swallowed them." The psychological impact of these experiences was profound. Fear, already a constant companion in war, was now paired with uncertainty of a magnitude few could articulate. The forest had become a character in its own right, indifferent, mysterious, and capable of acts that no soldier could predict or control. As news of the patrol's disappearance spread, the human response grew layered and complex. Families awaited letters that would never come. Comrades mourned without closure, and soldiers who had trained alongside them carried a weight that no physical wound could convey. The immediate aftermath was marked by a mixture of grief, disbelief, and a gnawing need for explanation. Military archives began to fill with reports, photographs of the dog tags, and witness statements, all carefully cataloged but none offering resolution. The forest, with its damp shadows and unbroken silence, became a memorial of absence, a place where bravery, mystery, and fear intersected in a way that left no answer. Only questions, the disappearance of the female patrol, rippled far beyond the forest, touching every life connected to the mission with a cold, invisible hand. Families back home, who had once imagined the squad returning safely, now endured weeks of anxious waiting only to face an ever-growing silence. Letters written in anticipation of reunion were met with the cruel absence of response, and photographs of the soldiers became both cherished keepsakes and painful reminders of uncertainty. Friends who had shared laughter, training drills, and whispered fears now walked through life carrying the same questions the military could not answer. Where did they go? How could 6 trained soldiers vanish without leaving a trace? Each unanswered question grew heavier with each passing day, embedding grief and confusion into the very fabric of the communities that had sent them to war. Within the ranks of the army, the psychological toll was just as profound. Comrades who had trained alongside the patrol struggled to reconcile their memories with the stark reality that those they had counted on, who had counted on them, were gone. Veterans described an acute sense of survivor's guilt, the feeling that every cautious movement, every decision to obey orders or hesitate, could have influenced the patrol's fate. Counseling records, later declassified, revealed repeated nightmares, heightened anxiety, and persistent hypervigilance among units stationed near the forest. Soldiers confessed in journals to hearing phantom footsteps in the night or glimpsing fleeting shadows in the mist, always fleeting, always unidentifiable, but reminiscent of the vanished women. The forest had not merely claimed their bodies, it had unsettled the minds of all who had ventured near it. Diaries recovered from the surviving members of adjacent units offered vivid insight into the emotional and moral complexities of the aftermath. One soldier described the struggle to maintain composure while continuing their duties. Every tree became a question, every rustle a reminder. How could 6 of our own disappear, and yet the ground remain undisturbed, as if mocking our understanding? Another recounted an unshakable sense of being observed, constant awareness that the forest now possessed an intelligence of its own, deliberate and inescapable. Even officers, trained to suppress emotion in favor of strategy, found themselves haunted by the impossible circumstances. A report from a battalion commander noted, "Discipline cannot account for this. Tactics, experience, training, none of it explains what occurred. It is as though the forest itself intervened." The language of reports shifted from tactical terminology to words tinged with fear, and the creeping sense of the inexplicable. This emotional weight was compounded by the profound professional consequences. Units tasked with reconnaissance and intelligence gathering became increasingly hesitant, cautious to the point of paralysis. Soldiers second-guessed decisions they had once executed with instinctive precision, fearing the forest, the unknown, and the impossible outcomes it had produced. Even months later, new recruits were warned about the area as if it were a haunted zone. Stories of vanishing shadows, whispers, and the perfect circle of dog tags became embedded in military training folklore. A cautionary tale to instill both respect and fear. Psychologists later noted that these accounts, while anecdotal, shaped collective behavior, influencing how soldiers interacted with unfamiliar terrain and how they interpreted. The thin line between observation and hallucination in high-stress conditions, the human cost was also marked by silence and secrecy. Some officers imposed unofficial restrictions on discussing the patrol's disappearance, fearing that speculation could erode morale or incite panic. Yet the absence of dialogue did nothing to alleviate the emotional strain. Instead, it intensified it. Soldiers shared stories in hushed tones, connecting dots between fleeting glimpses, unnatural sounds, and inexplicable events. Parents and siblings of the vanished women clung to these fragments, hoping for explanations that never arrived. Scholars would later examine the phenomenon of grief compounded by mystery, noting that unresolved disappearances carried a unique psychological imprint, a constant tension between hope and despair. Beyond grief and fear, there was also reverence. The vanished patrol became a symbol of courage, professionalism, and unwavering commitment. Soldiers who had known them spoke of their bravery, not in the abstract, but in vivid recollections of daring maneuvers, disciplined composure under fire, and relentless dedication to mission objectives. The narrative of heroism intertwined seamlessly with that of mystery. The patrol's fate was a testament to valor. Yet it was equally a reminder of forces natural, tactical or otherwise, beyond human comprehension. Memorials, written accounts, and oral histories reflected this duality, celebrating courage while acknowledging the profound enigma that surrounded their disappearance. Even decades later, interviews with veterans reinforced the emotional resonance. Men and women who had trained with or commanded units near are portrayed. The patrol recalled lingering sensations of unease whenever forests of similar density appeared on the map. Some admitted to feeling a pull of the past, a flash of memory when encountering a circle of leaves, a rustle in the wind, or the faint glimmer of metal under sunlight filtering through branches. The story of the vanished patrol became more than a historical record. It transformed into a psychological touchstone, a symbol of bravery, uncertainty, and the enduring question of how courage can sometimes intersect with the unknowable. Years. Even decades later would not diminish the enigma surrounding the vanished female patrol. Military historians scoured archives, poring over field reports, photographs of the infamous circle of dog tags, first-hand accounts from survivors, yet no explanation fully satisfied the growing legend. Some theorized enemy capture or miscommunication during a chaotic mission. Others argued that a freak accident had caused the soldiers to become disoriented and lost, swallowed by the forest and fog. Yet these theories faltered when faced with the evidence, or rather, the lack thereof. No bodies were ever recovered, no weapons, no signs of struggle, nothing beyond the impossibly precise formation of the dog tags, glinting quietly in the mud, like an unspoken message. It was as though the forest itself had rewritten the rules of reality, taking the patrol without a trace, leaving only this silent, haunting signature behind. Eyewitness accounts persisted in classified files. Soldiers described fleeting shadows that moved against the wind, whispers in the mist that faded when approached, and sensations of being watched by an unseen presence. Some claimed to have glimpsed the patrol ahead of them in the fog, only to find nothing upon arrival. These testimonies, carefully logged, but never fully explained, hinted at forces beyond conventional understanding, whether natural, psychological, or something more extraordinary. Experts later debated the significance, some attributing it to mass hallucination, others to heightened stress and environmental factors. But the persistent alignment of physical evidence and multiple independent accounts made total skepticism difficult. The mystery was compounded by reports that certain files regarding the patrol's disappearance were permanently sealed, labeled sensitive, unverified phenomena, leaving gaps that fueled endless speculation. The story of the patrol transformed into legend, not merely a tale of courage in wartime, but a cautionary chronicle of the unknowable. Scholars, soldiers, and civilians alike were drawn to it, compelled by the tension between human heroism and forces beyond comprehension. Memorials were erected, yet they served not just as markers of bravery, but as reminders of the enduring unknown. Oral histories passed the story, along with reverence, fear, and awe, framing the patrol as both warriors and enigmas. Attempts to reconcile the facts with reality only deepened the mystery. How could trained soldiers vanish without a trace, leaving behind a flawless circle of metal, the ghostly echo of their presence and nothing else? And so, the forest retains its secret. Each branch, each shadow, each ripple of mist holds fragments of the story, accessible only to those willing to step into the silence and uncertainty that surrounds it. Scholars may write, officers may theorize, and historians may debate, but the truth remains elusive. The vanished patrol has become immortalized in the tension between bravery and mystery, a reminder that some events resist explanation, that courage can exist alongside the inexplicable, and that certain truths may forever remain locked away just beyond reach. The final image of the perfect circle of dog tags in the mud lingers, a haunting emblem of valor, sacrifice, and the unknown. It is a truth that cannot be fully claimed, a story that will continue to unsettle, fascinate, and provoke curiosity, and perhaps, one day, reveal secrets long hidden in the shadowed depths of the forest.